Clarice Starling walked through the gray corridors of the FBI Academy with a mix of focus and uncertainty, trying to look steadier than she felt. She had always pushed herself harder than others expected, and every assignment felt like a chance to prove she wasn't just another trainee. When she was called to meet Jack Crawford from the Behavioral Science Unit, she didn't know why a senior figure like him would want her. Crawford greeted her with his usual calm tone, but there was something serious behind his eyes. He explained that they needed help on a sensitive case involving a serial killer known as Buffalo Bill, a man who abducted women and left their bodies in disturbing condition. They didn't have much progress, and time was slipping. Crawford wanted Clarice to visit a particular inmate at the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, a former psychiatrist named Dr. Hannibal Lecter. He had once been brilliant, respected, and well-connected in the psychiatric world, but he was also one of the most dangerous killers in the country. Rumor claimed he could break down a person's mind with a few sentences. Crawford hoped Lecter might give insight into Buffalo Bill. Clarice accepted without complaint, though her heart tightened. She arrived at the hospital where Dr. Frederick Chilton, the director, greeted her. Chilton was eager to impress and made sure she knew the rules: no touching, no handing him anything, no letting him hand anything to her, and never turning her back to him. His tone made Clarice uncomfortable, but she stayed focused. When Chilton escorted her down the long row of cells, she passed several inmates who shouted crude remarks or stared with empty eyes. Lecter's cell, however, looked strangely clean. He stood in the center with a stillness that unsettled her. He spoke with a calm, precise voice and studied her like an X-ray. Clarice introduced herself and gave him a questionnaire, but Lecter was more interested in her than the form. That night, as Clarice reviewed the thin stack of evidence once again, the weight of the investigation pressed harder than ever. She stayed in a small room in Tennessee, trying to piece together Lecter's clues. She remembered the details he emphasized, each one chosen carefully. He never wasted words, so she focused on the idea of transformation and the killers Lecter had mentioned. Something connected Buffalo Bill to a person who once tried and failed to transition through psychological therapy. Clarice felt the clues forming a pattern, but the full picture was still out of reach. Meanwhile, in the courthouse's upper floor, 2 guards kept watch over Lecter. The cage they placed him in looked secure, built from steel bars with nothing he should have been able to use as a weapon. But Lecter carried patience like an instrument. Chilton had allowed a few comforts, such as music and drawings, believing it kept Lecter calm. The guards served him dinner. They didn't realize he had hidden a small piece of metal earlier, taken from a pen Chilton had carelessly left behind. When one guard approached to remove his food tray, Lecter moved with shocking speed. The sound of his attack echoed through the empty hall. Moments later, the second guard was taken down in the same brutal, calculated way. Lecter made sure no movement was wasted. He took his time afterward, using the guards' uniforms, blood, and positioning to stage a scene that would trick anyone who found it. When backup officers finally stormed the floor, they saw a body on the ground, bleeding heavily, with an officer still breathing weakly. They rushed the injured guard into an ambulance, unaware that the man in the uniform was Lecter. By the time they realized the deception, the ambulance had already left the scene. Lecter disappeared into the night, free for the first time in years. His escape rippled through the media and sent shock waves across law enforcement. Every agency scrambled to react, but Clarice FCU. Clarice pulled the hidden door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air grew colder with every step. She held her gun tight and tried to steady her breathing. The basement wasn't one room but a maze of narrow halls patched together over years. Old brick walls, exposed pipes, and dangling bulbs created a place that felt like a different world from the quiet house above. She listened for movement. A distant metallic clank echoed from somewhere deeper inside. She followed the sound. Catherine heard footsteps again and screamed as loudly as she could. Her voice broke from exhaustion, but desperation filled every word. Clarice caught it faintly and followed. She found the pit after turning a corner. The sight of Catherine in the hole made her chest tighten. Catherine looked up with wide, frantic eyes and begged Clarice not to leave her. Clarice assured her she wasn't going anywhere and told her to stay calm while she looked for a way to get her out. She couldn't pull Catherine up alone, not without a rope or tool. And Buffalo Bill was still somewhere in the basement. Clarice backed away and continued searching. The hallway twisted into a room filled with sewing machines, fabric strips, and mannequins arranged like silent witnesses. Half-finished pieces of a horrifying garment lay on the table. The shapes made her stomach turn. She pushed forward, stepping into another corridor that led to a cold, cramped space buzzing with a low hum. It was the sound of a ventilation fan. That was when she felt something shift behind her. Buffalo Bill was watching her from the shadows. His movement made the light flicker across his pale eyes. Clarice raised her gun and ordered him to stop. Bill slipped back into darkness without a sound. She followed carefully, sweeping her hand along the wall to steady herself. The space felt endless, but she refused to turn back. She could hear Catherine calling again, terrified. Bill moved silently through the darkness. The days after the rescue passed in a blur. Clarice returned to the FBI Academy, where she faced a mix of praise, questions, and quiet stares from trainees who now saw her differently. Word spread fast. Cadets whispered about how she had taken down a serial killer alone. Instructors looked at her with new respect. Crawford checked on her often, but he didn't pressure her to talk. He seemed to understand she was still processing everything. She tried to focus on her coursework, but her mind slipped back to the basement, the darkness, the gunshots, and the look on Catherine's face when she was pulled from the pit. Clarice pushed herself forward, believing the best way to handle it was to keep moving. The FBI held a small graduation ceremony for Clarice and the other trainees. She put on her dress uniform and made her way to the hall. People greeted her warmly, congratulated her, and asked about the case in careful tones. Clarice accepted the handshakes and compliments, but she felt distant, as if she were watching herself from outside. During the ceremony, Crawford approached her with a small smile and handed her a note. It was simple and formal, welcoming her to the bureau. She thanked him, feeling a quiet pride rise inside her. She had fought hard for this moment. After the ceremony, Clarice stepped outside into the cool air to breathe. She looked around at the peaceful campus and the hills in the distance. For the first time since the case began, she allowed herself to feel a sense of calm. But when she returned to her dorm, an agent stopped her and handed her a message. It was a call from someone who said he wanted to congratulate her personally. There was no name on the message, only that the caller would try again. Later that evening, as Clarice prepared to attend the celebration dinner, a phone rang in a quiet office across the academy. She answered out of habit. The voice that greeted her was smooth, calm, and unmistakable. It was Lecter. Clarice froze.